Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my 2023 reading tracker video. So I did one of these probably a little bit earlier last year, but in case you haven't noticed, I haven't actually posted a video on my channel in like a month. Just motivationally not really there. Pregnancy is wild, and honestly, these are probably the last couple of videos you're gonna get from me, not just this year, but for probably a couple of months into 2023 as well. So, yeah, I just kind of wanted to go out with a bang and give you guys my 2023 updated reading tracker. I've added a lot of things to last year's reading tracker that I've kind of been testing throughout the year, and I want to go over all of those changes with you guys. If you have paid any attention to my community tabs, I did post a little thing several months ago about the beta test version that I have been using. I've made that available to you guys, and honestly, if you've been using that, not a ton has changed. So you could probably just skip all of this if you'd like to. But I think first we're just going to do a quick overview of what last year's reading tracker looked like, and then I will jump into what this year's reading tracker is going to look like. Okay, so this is last year's reading tracker. Honestly, I'm not going to spend too much time going through this with you guys. You can watch last year's video if you want. I'll put a little thing linking to it up in the cards. This is the introduction page. It just explains to you how each of the tabs works and all of the stuff that each of the tabs does. So, you know, it's pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. I wanted to preface this again with the fact that several of the tabs that I used last year and this year, because I just built off of last year's, were inspired by other people pretty heavily, from G from Book Roast, her Pile reading tracker, Allie from the Hardback Hoarders stats tracker, and then Gavin from How to Train Your Gavin's series tracker. I utilized a lot of the general formats from those, but built off of them pretty heavily, so while they might look a little bit familiar, the way that they work is considerably different for mine. So this is just your general different categories that you can track: book title, month, how long it took you to read, whether you DNF'd it. This is where the magic happens. This is where you track your ratings, and how many stars you're going to give it, genre, age range, so on and so forth. And this is what the yearly stats page generally looked like. Nothing too fancy there. Same with the monthly stats. Just kind of pretty simple. The series tracker, this has changed a little bit in a couple of different ways from last year. So this is what it looked like last year with the series, the author, how many you've read, how many were in that series, whether the series is finished or not, the favorite book in that series, your average rating for that series, so on and so forth. The arc tracker that I have, if you read a lot of arcs, this is a good way to track when they're coming out, whether you've read them, reviewed them, DNF'd them, so on and so forth, with a couple of graphs over here for stats on the side. There's also a books bought and sold tab, which just tracks like what books you bought or sold, and how much you made doing either of those, or how much you spent doing either of those, whether or not you saved any money doing that, and a graph that tracks all of it. And then here's an explanation of, the different rating categories and what each of the categories means in escapes. So again, that's last year's tracker, pretty basic, not really too much going on there outside of all of those things. This year's tracker, I have added a few more things, so let's jump into that. Okay, so this is the new introduction page for the 2023 tracker. I added a little quick reference guide up here at the top, and if you go to whatever cells are linked, it will take you straight to that particular spot on the introduction sheet. Again, this is just how to use it, and if you are confused about how any parts of it works or what any of it means, I have that here. If this is your first time using one of my reading trackers, I would definitely read all of it. Other than that, go to the relevant categories if you just need something explained to you, and you'll probably be all right. But we'll just go right into the first tab, which is the Escapes tab. This is your main reading tracker page. It should look pretty familiar. So you've got book title, the title of the book, the month that you read it, the author, whether or not this is a reread for you. This is going to be a little bit new compared to last year. I have added in a progress tracker. So what this means is you can track your progress while you're reading a book through page or percentage. What this means is if you choose page, then say your book has 300 pages in it and you're on page 150, it'll tell you that you're 50% of the way through that book and the progress bar will update. If you decide to track through percentage, you can just, like, if say you're reading on Kindle or audiobook, still fill in the pages category because that's how you calculate how many pages you read that month or that year or so on and so forth. But in terms of current progress, you can say that you are 75% of the way through that book and the progress bar will reflect that. Date started, date finished, that kind of does the same thing that it always has. And it tells you that if you started a book then and you finished a book then, it took you 3 days to read it. We'll do it this way actually. We'll say book 1 that we read in December by author 1, and moving on. This is the same reading tracker as before. Escapes hasn't changed. Same theory as Compile, but I retrofitted the categories to be a little bit more what I needed them to be, what I rate my books off of. So for this particular book, if we say that I really enjoyed it, that I thought that the beginning was really, really good, and I liked the characters, they were okay, the atmosphere was not great, and the plot was not great, but I also didn't really love how it ended, but the style was also okay, so it tells me what the rating would be on a scale of 1 to 10, but it also gives you my star rating. This is new as well. I've added the option of using full stars, half stars, or quarter stars. So if you change this to half stars, this entire column will update to show you 3 stars, 3.5, 4, 4.5, so on and so forth. If you change it to quarter stars, it will do the same, but in quarters, obviously. So this looks like it's pretty solidly sitting at a 3. It's not changing at all. But you can see how it moves around depending on what you change your ratings to. So this will go up to quarter stars, but if you change that back to full stars, it will stay, and in that case it would update to a 4. Another thing that I have added is a Readathon Tracker tab kind of a thing. We'll get into that a little bit later. There's a special tab for it along the bottom, but essentially any readathon that you put into that tab will populate into this drop-down menu. As of right now, the only option is no. So, like, as in no, this was not a part of a readathon. If you don't like this, you can hide it. If you don't feel like doing 2 readathons, you can hide it. You can do whatever you want. It shouldn't affect the rest of the spreadsheet too much. Then we have the genre of the book, the age range of the book. This is a little bit different from last year as well. I wanted a way to track if I was going to be reading a book in multiple different formats. So, like, I didn't like only being able to select a physical book if I read a book both physically and audibly, or just selecting an ebook if I read it physically and on ebook form. So in this case, if you read a book physically, say you already owned it, and you also read it via ebook, but you borrowed that from Libby, so this will populate into your monthly stats showing that you read a book in both of those formats. In terms of book type, pretty much the same as last year. Graphic novels, mangas, comics, novellas, anthologies, or just full-length novels. Whether or not the book is an arc, the year that the book was published, whether it is a series, a standalone, or a continuing series, whether it contained any... Whoops, sorry guys. Whether it contained any kind of representation, and you can select the kind of representation from that drop-down menu, and here you can elaborate on what kind of rep in that type of rep it had, how the author identifies, whether or not they're POC, and if they are POC, you can elaborate on this column. And then finally, if you had any notes, that could probably be moved to wherever you find it most convenient. I don't usually type out my notes, so I like to keep it at the end, but it'll stay down there for the most part. So if I have any thoughts that I'm reading, I'll just type out something really quick in that box. So that's it for that one. Now if we go to the filtered escapes view, this is exactly the same thing, except I made a separate page that will filter based on whatever that column is. So if you wanted to filter by rereads, if there was anything that was checked as true. If you want to filter this by either percentage or page, it'll only show you whatever you choose to filter by. I'm not really going to go too much in depth on that because that would require me to fill out more of the spreadsheet. So yeah, that's that one. Then we have the books bought sold tab. This I don't think has changed at all, so I'm not really going to go too much into all of this. This is all pretty much the same in terms of the actual table. When you come over to the side, though, you'll see I added a couple more little columns here, and that is saved from borrowing books. We'll get into that on the next tab. One thing I forgot to mention that I added is that on every single one of these tabs, I've now added a little like home icon in the top left corner. So if you're like towards the end of the tabs and you want to go all the way back to the escapes and you don't want to like scroll all the way through your tabs to find it, you can just click on where the links you to your escapes tab and it'll take you back to the beginning, just for making it a little bit easier. And so then we can go back to borrowed books. So this is the next one. This is definitely new because I couldn't figure out how to make it work in time for the last year's reading tracker. So in borrowed books, this is very hands-off. You guys don't have to do anything pretty much with this at all. It all auto-populates just like the filtered escapes view does. It'll tell you the month that you checked the book out, the book's title, the author, what format you checked it out in, and what source that format came from. So in this case, that book one, we said that we read the ebook via Libby. It's right there, and the date that we finished the book. If you DNF'd it, that would auto-populate here. The only thing that you have to worry about typing into on this particular page is the amount saved column right here. Now, if you have borrowed a book in multiple formats and you don't feel like calculating it, I put a little calculator right in there for you. So you can just say, like, you would have bought the physical book for $10 and you would have bought the ebook for $5. So in total, you would have saved $15 by going to a library instead of buying that book. Down here, it just kind of puts together a little stats table of how many books you've checked out, how many of them you've completed reading, the percentage, what they would have cost you had you bought them all, and the cost of subscriptions, that goes into this next table over here. So for example, if you pay for Kindle Unlimited, and you pay $9.99 a month for Kindle Unlimited, then if one of the sources over here were to say Kindle Unlimited, it would pop that monthly cost down here into cost of subscriptions, and it would subtract that from how much you have saved. So for example, if we go back to the Escapes tab, and we say that you borrowed the ebook from Kindle Unlimited, you can see that this has changed to reflect that, and the cost of subscriptions is now subtracted. So technically, if we save $15 by having done it that way, then technically we've really only saved $5 because you paid $9.99 for the monthly subscription. But it will only tally that once, so if you've borrowed multiple books from Kindle Unlimited, it's not going to keep adding $9.99 for every single book you've borrowed because that's not how Kindle Unlimited works. But it will tally it once for that particular month for you. Then down here, it just kind of puts together all of the sources that you've borrowed books for. All right, so moving on. Well, actually, we can go back to the books bought sold tab, and I can show you that it'll populate that bottom number of how much you saved by borrowing books down here, and it'll add that to your savings on the books bought and sold tab. And then if you go over to ARC Tracker, moving on, it's pretty much the same, I think, as it used to be. I don't really think there's anything different about this. The release date of the ARC that you're reading, the title of it, the author, what series it is, what number in the series it is. Under ARC status, you can say you were approved to read the ARC, you got denied when you requested an ARC, you requested it but you haven't heard back from it yet, or this was just sent to you unsolicited by a publisher, which is always a fun little thing. Did not mean to type that. Here's where you can put the publisher name for whoever you might have, and publisher review requests, which is like don't post any reviews prior to like a week before the book is released, things like that. Just any notes that the publisher has in terms of your review and what you're allowed to do or not do regarding it. This is just the format of your ARC. and where you acquired the arc from, whether it was NetGalley, like Edelweiss, the publisher, the author themselves. And then finally, the last 3 columns haven't changed, so whether you read it, whether you reviewed it, or whether you DNF'd it, or just didn't read it at all. And I've shown this to you guys before, but we can do it again. So say, for example, that arc number 1 comes out on December 6th, which I think is tomorrow from when I'm filming this. Author number 1. We can leave this blank for now because it doesn't really quite matter. So I've got this set to color code, and say you were approved for this arc. It will now turn that entire row green because you were approved for it. And then say you read it and you reviewed it already. It will then check that arc off of your list. You don't have to worry about it. You've completed all of the things that you needed to. If you did DNF it or you don't plan to read it, it will also check that off of your list so that you don't have to worry about it then. And this also goes for if you were denied for an arc, it will actually all turn red and be crossed out as well, because obviously you never received it, you were denied for it, you don't have to worry about it. Requested is blue, and then sent, because you received that arc, is also going to be green, just like approved would be. Now, over here, I do have it set to every single month that you have arcs, either requested or denied or approved for. It will tally that into a bar chart for you, so you can kind of have a visual representation of how many arcs you've received or requested for any particular month or been denied for. Mine looks real messy, and it is not a great indicator of where I'm at with arcs for this year, so I'm not going to show you guys, but you can get the gist if you play around with this a little bit. And then the reading status of read, reviewed, or did not read would be there, and then how many arcs you've been approved for or denied for or are currently in the request process that you haven't gotten an answer on yet. That would all show up in that particular pie graph. Now, moving on to the series tracker, this has changed just a little bit from the last one. So if we're reading series number 1 by author number 1, so say there's 10 books in the series, and, that says 20. Say there's 10 books in the series and you've only read 2 of them, it will tell you that you have 8 books left in the series to read, and it will show you that you have read these first 2 books, so they will turn green. If the series is completely finished at that 10-book mark, the author's not planning on writing anymore, you can hit finished. And from 11 on, because there's more numbers than there are potentially books in any given series, these will all turn red, showing you that you don't have to worry about anything after book 10. And the blue just indicates that these are books in the series that are out that you have yet to read. If the series is in progress, it's actually going to turn purple, because by in progress, I just mean you don't know if there's going to be any more books written. You're not sure if the author is planning on announcing anything left, so you can go ahead and put in progress, and that'll just give you a little bit more color coding so that you know where you might be at in terms of future books in that series, but you do know for sure that you still have these 8 that you need to read. Now, when they're green, I do recommend, when you've read the book, I do recommend that you take whatever your rating was for it and you put it in here. So say you thought one was 4 stars and you thought one was 5 stars, it'll average your series ratings together in this column here, and you can see that you gave the series an average of 4.5 stars. Now, say you read 2 books in the series, you do have 8 books left, but you read those 2 and you were like, nope, this is not for me, I'm done. You can go ahead and hit series DNF. It's going to cross that series off of your list for you because you don't want to worry about it anymore, and it's going to turn the rest of those books in the series bright red because you don't care about them, you didn't like them, you didn't read them, so on and so forth. That's one more thing that I added onto this. Other than that, the only other thing to show you guys is, for example, say there are only 2 books in the series and it's completely finished, you can then check off, even if it's in progress, if you've read all of the books that are out in that series so far, you can just check off up to date. This is just a way to, later on, if you want to sort by series that you're still reading versus series that you aren't, or series that you haven't caught up on, you can always sort by things that are checked off. It'll show you have 0 books remaining in the series, and that's just an easy way to kind of keep things organized. Now we get into the Readathon Tracker. This is one of the more complex spreadsheets that I have in here. Lots of things that are linked to other things. So if we have Readathon number 1, and it's happening in January, You can put a link to whoever's site is running the readathon. So for the Magical Readathon Aurelium, you can link to G's introduction video, and you can say that it's G from Book Roast, and just say that it's starting, we'll say January 1st, and running until January 31st. Now what I have here is you can go to whatever hyperlink is there. It's populated in the name of the readathon, the dates that they're running, and here is where you would type in the prompts. So if we're using Magical Readathon as an example, obviously the prompts are going to differ depending on whatever career path you've taken. So we'll say prompt number 1, prompt number 2, prompt number 3, so on and so forth. And whatever you type into this prompt list is going to automatically populate into this drop-down menu. And this is just because people don't necessarily read all of their prompts in order of the prompts they're like given in the readathon. So as soon as you type in Readathon 1 over here, then you can go back to the Escapes Reading tab and type in Readathon 1 is what you're reading this first book for. And once you've done that, you can see that it automatically has populated that book in under this readathon with the rating that you gave it, and you can say that you use this book for prompt 2. And you can check off prompt 2 as being used so that it's crossed off, and you can see that you've utilized that prompt. And every single book that you put Readathon 1 in there for will show up in this list. The same will go for Readathon 2. If it's also happening in January, but say that it's happening January 1st through the 14th, it's only a 2-week readathon. And for this one, we have book 2. That we read in a couple of days at the beginning of January, that we felt pretty average about, and we used that for Readathon 2, or if we also read this book for the second readathon, put that in there as well. So we've read 2 books for Readathon 2 and 1 book for Readathon 1, and you could come down here and you'll see that Readathon 1 has book 1 used for it for prompt number 1, and for Readathon 2, you can select this one was for prompt 1 in Readathon number 2, this one was for prompt 3 in Readathon number 2, and you can check those off. And that's just a kind of easy way for you to keep track of the books that you're reading for a readathon and whether or not you've completed all of the prompts that you needed to. And once you're done with the readathon, if you finished it, you can just go ahead and hit the checkbox just as a way to keep track of it for you. So I do have this set to go all the way up to 24 readathons, just on the assumption that maybe some people do 2 readathons a month for the entirety of the year. It was kind of unrealistic for me to go too much higher than that, so if you read more than that, I apologize. Maybe you can just copy the sheet and make it happen again. Also, I only did, I think it was 10 prompts per readathon. If you have more than that, you can certainly add on to it. You might just have to play around with it at that point, just because it's kind of hard to figure out the formulas, but I did need something standard that I could mess around with, so I picked 10 prompts, 24 readathons, just in case, like I said, people do 2 a month, and the only things that you really need to worry about typing in on this are the prompt lists and this top Readathon Tracker table. Other than that, everything's drop-down menus are automatically populated in, and you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so then we move into monthly stats, and this has mostly not changed. It's got the total books read per month, the pages that you read in that month, the books that you DNF'd in that month. If you bought any books in that month, it'll show up there, however many books you borrowed, so it'll show you all of the books that you borrowed in that particular month, be it from Libby or Kindle Unlimited or Scribd or anything like that, how many arcs you read, how many rereads you read. I will say the only thing that you have to worry about typing, all of this is going to automatically populate in, except for favorite book of the month. I really liked this as a way to keep track of the books that I was reading in my favorite books per month. So in this case, I have book 1 and book 2 on my first tab, so book 2 was my favorite, we'll say, in January. You can go ahead and type that right there. And then that'll come into play a little bit later. I'll show you how that works, but Then there's new series versus continuing series versus standalones, all things that you select on that first Escapes tab. Whether you read a book physically, audibly, ebook, if you read a book in both physical and ebook form, if you read a book in physical audio form, ebook audio, or if you used all three. This is the genre list. This is the stars list. And if you start out at the beginning of the year and you don't use quarter or half stars, or you use one of those, whatever, you can just go ahead and hide any of these rows that you don't utilize. Other than that, I just kind of keep it that way because sometimes I want to get a little bit more specific. Sometimes I don't, so I just kind of keep all of them there, but it doesn't hurt anything to hide the rows that you're not using. Sorry if something skipped, I just deleted something that didn't need to be in there. But this is the book format, whether it was a graphic novel, a manga, a comic, novella, anthology, so on and so forth. And then the age range of the book that you read in that particular month. This goes all the way over to December, understandably, it's 12 months in a year. And then we move on to the yearly bookish stats. So it will show you how many books you read per month in both chart form and number form, how many rereads you had throughout the entire year, how many books you DNF'd, how many arcs you read. This is where it breaks down your pages by month, but it'll also tell you how much you read total at that stage in the year. Over here, I've put the favorite books, so remember that box from the last tab. Whatever favorite books you've put in there, it will then generate that list for you right here, so you can see your 12 favorite books throughout the entire year, if that's kind of how you want to do it. So it'll show you your favorite book of each month listed out. This will show you your series stats, the average page ranges that you read throughout the year, how many books that you've bought versus how many of those bought books that you've read. Yep, that's me calling all of us out for buying a lot of books and then not actually reading them. That graph is going to show us. This is the split up of the charts by genre. This is the chart showing all of the stars that you've given out throughout the year. Where you acquired the books that you've read from, be it the library, the publisher, Edelweiss, you owned it already, you bought it, so on and so forth. Formats, graphic novel, manga, etc. The rep that you've read, the age ranges that you've read, and the format that you read all of them in. And then down here, I did also add in a chart that shows how many readathons you participated in throughout the year versus how many readathons that you completed. So this is where checking off that readathon, if you've completed it, comes into play, because then it will show you that you completed that in this chart, and it'll show you the percentage that you have done versus what you have not. And then finally on this is the breakdown of all of the numerical ways to get half stars and quarter stars and full stars. This is the chart detailing on that scale of 1 to 10 how good or bad you think something is, just as a guideline for how you're rating things in your Escapes tracker itself. And then down here is how I break down Escapes as an acronym, what each of those mean for me. You can change that to whatever you like, obviously. But yeah, so that is the entirety of this year's Escapes reading tracker. Like I said, I do recommend, if you haven't used this before, go into that first introduction page and read through it. And I'm not really available for questions just because I can get a lot of them. Make sure that if you're actually trying to utilize this, you're going to go to File and make a copy of it for yourself. This is not open for editing. You guys cannot go in and change anything in here. I just will get an email about it and I'll deny it. If there's something in here that doesn't work correctly, definitely make sure to let me know via comment or via my email, which you guys can find down at the bottom. But other than that, this is the entirety of this year's Escapes reading tracker. I hope you guys like it. I hope you guys will utilize it. I definitely have been more consistent with tracking my reading since I started using an Excel sheet versus anything else. I just don't really work with the notebooks or the apps very well. This is just something that is easier for me because I can kind of customize it to what I like and what I use more than other things. So yeah, that's it for this reading tracker, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps out my channel if you do. I'll be leaving links to this and last year's reading tracker down in the description box down below. Like I said, just remember, file, make a copy. Don't try and edit it or use the master copy for yourself. It's not going to work. But other than that, that's it for me today, guys. So I'll talk to you in my next one. Bye!